Thank you for joining us post the webinar for the North Atlantic right whales. Again, my name is Brendel Townsend, and we also have here Sean Brillant with us, who is a right whale expert and who answered most of your, well, all of your questions during the webinar. So there were quite a few questions that we just simply could not get to due to time. And so we decided to take this opportunity to answer all of those questions and any follow-up questions that possibly were sent to Sean afterwards. So we're going to get going and ask Sean the first question. Hi, Sean. Thank you.
Hi, Brendel. Looking forward to getting through these questions.
Okay, so question number one. Do ships have rules for using sonar to see underwater bodies as large as whales so that we could require them to use them and cut engine use?
There are no rules that are required for using sonar for seeing these things underwater. It's rare that the vessel would be able to see it. Sometimes you can. If anyone's used a fish finder, you know what it's like when you see a big school go under your boat or something, you'll see it. So you may see a whale, but there's no way that sonar would be fast enough or responsive enough for a boat to either cut its engines to avoid a whale or to reduce the engines to reduce disturbing the whale. The better solution in this case is to get a system in place where we have an early warning system where a vessel will know that at some distance ahead there might be a whale in front of them. But the sonar on the vessel is not a good enough option right now, and there's no rules around it in any event.
Okay, thank you. I'm curious, do you know what the full speed of the large ships are? I'm interested to know the comparison to the slowed speed of 10 knots.
Right. So through the Gulf of St. Lawrence, I think is what we were talking about in particular, that highway of large cargo vessels going through the Gulf of St. Lawrence. I think the average speed is probably somewhere around 17 knots. These are nautical miles per hour. But they will go as fast as 20 or even faster. And these are large ships. These ships are the size of small skyscrapers, and they're moving at 17 to 20 to 25 knots through these areas, very fast. The slowdown requires them to go down to 10 knots. There are two consequences to this. One for the whales, that slightly reduces the chance of killing whales or gives the whales a chance to get out of the way, although recent research suggests it may not be as safe as we might think. The other consequence of this, though, is that it means it takes a vessel longer to travel through the Gulf of St. Lawrence. And this is part of the thing that is a big concern to the shipping industry. But nonetheless, really happy to see that the regulators, Transport Canada, is enforcing this speed limit because it's going to help in some small way, for protecting these whales. But sorry, the short answer is these vessels are typically going 17 to 20 knots or faster.
Thanks. Okay. So what trends in food copepod quality are being seen in the Gulf of St. Lawrence and also back in the Gulf of Maine and Bay of Fundy? With warming continuing, can we expect North Atlantic right whales to move upwards towards bowhead whale range soon?
A very good question. I won't get into it. There is lots of research being done on the copepods of both the Bay of Fundy and in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. There's been research published just recently that's also looked at the last 10 years or so and the trends that have been happening. Essentially what has happened is we've seen the density and the quality of copepods in the Bay of Fundy decrease and in some ways move earlier in the season so the whales can't access it. And in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, we've seen it slightly increase. And this is one of the reasons that we've seen the whales move up to that area. Much more details and little differences in there, but that is essentially what we're seeing. It is entirely possible that we could see further shifts. I mean, our oceans and our climate are changing. These changes are underway, and it's going to be difficult for us to stop them. Whether or not they actually start overlapping with bowheads is difficult to say, but it is not out of the question that the range of copepods and therefore the range of, and these specific copepods, Calanus marshicus is what these things are looking for. These are bugs in the ocean. There is every likelihood that they will continue to move a little bit further north, and so the right whales could also end up moving further north. We've learned from this situation in the Gulf of St. Lawrence that this is really important because if we don't have measures in place to manage human activities when these whales move into a new area, that's when they get in trouble. So very important thing that's being examined right now. Yes.
Okay, so do North Atlantic right whales have natural predators?
I guess they do have natural predators. Any sort of predator that's big enough to take down a whale, which is pretty much none once you become an adult whale. But as juvenile whales, large sharks, obviously, and of course, killer whales are whale specialists and will hunt whales. So these are really the only natural predators that exist. And really, even then, it's mostly old or smaller young animals that might be in trouble from these large predators that exist in the ocean. For the most part, they're the only things that would threaten a right whale. They're far too large to be threatened by anything else other than humans.
Right, I was waiting for you to say the human part. Okay, so how and why did the small humpback whale get so far to Montreal? And is it possible to bring it back before it starves or gets hurt?
We talked a little bit about this on the webinar, so hopefully we've answered most of this question. Here we are a couple days after Oceans Day, and unfortunately, sadly, we've learned that this animal's died. Preliminary evidence suggests that it was struck by a ship that killed it, and this is a very sad situation, of course, but it was in a very dangerous place. I think the only thing I would add to that question that maybe wasn't answered is if anything could be done. It's difficult to say. Small animals like dolphins and so on that get into areas where they shouldn't be, like for example, a dangerous port or something, can sometimes be herded out. And so there is a possibility that maybe we could have tried to herd the whale, but it's not so easy to direct where whales should and shouldn't go. So there really wasn't a whole lot that could be done except to stand by and be ready and perhaps pull back some human activities if we could and if we knew where it was. But that's why this was a difficult and a sad situation, but obviously very inspiring to many people, and hopefully something that stays in people's minds to realize that even when you're in a big city way up a river, you're still very connected to wildlife and still very connected to the ocean. Yeah, thank you.
That's very unfortunate, yeah. So can the lines be made more visible to the whales?
There has been one bit of research that has looked at the ability of whales to detect fishing lines of different color in the water column. The evidence is a little bit unclear, but it does seem like there were some lines that they seemed to notice and some lines that they didn't. It wasn't very clear. The difficult situation with this is relating to the fact that you will assume that if a whale sees a line that it would avoid it, but we don't actually even know if that's the case. If I see an interesting colored flower in my yard, I might go look at it, and this might actually be the case for whales as well. So this is one of those things that we need to be careful of. Can they detect it is a good question, and maybe they can. We're not totally clear about that yet. But will they avoid it if they can detect it is the second question, and that's even less clear. So short answer is we think they can detect different colors better than others, but it's not clear. It doesn't seem to be something that holds a lot of promise for solving this problem.
So similar to that question that you just answered, what about certain gear modifications similar to the turtle exclusion device, which could decrease the rate by which they get entangled? So for example, modifications in weight that could help them get freed easily.
Yeah, this is a great question. There is a lot of information out there, and I won't try to get into this too much. We're spending quite a bit of time investigating this, in fact, so there is quite a lot to be said. There is a lot of modifications to fishing gear that's taking place actually around the world to try and find ways to prevent large animals like whales, but also sharks and sea turtles and seals and sea lions from becoming entangled in this gear. This includes ropes that part more easily so that a whale might be able to break free. This includes the construction of particular links that break or sleeves that break free so that whales won't become as entrapped. There is discussions about the importance of having lighter gear versus heavy gear and different modifications in this way. So there are a number of tools. There isn't anything that's obviously worked yet. There has been some really good ideas that have been put out there that didn't work so good. Stiff lines, for example. We can't seem to make lines stiff enough that a whale can't still get entangled in it. And then there's some ideas that are out there that just haven't been solved. Like someone has said, well, can we get a line that dissolves, for example, if it comes into contact with the living animal? And that's a great idea, but the science doesn't, the engineering doesn't exist to be able to do that yet. So there is a lot of work going on about this. If you check out some of the resources at our organizations and at the organizations that are working on right whales, you'll see more of the information that's being done there. And fishermen, I think, around the world are trying to innovate to solve this problem now.
Maybe some of the young students watching will be inspired by this and maybe do some of these projects themselves.
I have a lot of hope and expectation that the answers to most of these problems are coming from the youth that are listening right now. So
I hope so too. Is there a sound emission that these whales will move away from? And could ships be required to transmit an undersea signal that would alert the whales?
I think we talked about this briefly in the seminar too, so I encourage you to take a look at that. I'll briefly mention again that the short answer here is there does not seem to be. They don't seem to react to noise, and they don't seem to react to noise in ways that we expect. And so, so the answer there is no.
Okay, this is a bit of a long question, but a good one. One concern I've seen pop up has been in the Bay of Fundy area, where the surveillance efforts are less than which is seen in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, and there are no acoustic buoy gliders to aid in the detection. Are you aware of any plans to include acoustic detection devices in the Bay of Fundy, especially in light of decreased opportunistic sightings from tourism? And as an important area in the past and sightings that still occur, albeit at a lower rate. So I'd hate to see it fall to the wayside.
Really good question. So first of all, the Bay of Fundy is not forgotten. Many of us are sort of hoping that the right whales will go back to that, being their traditional feeding ground. Perhaps this is a blip in the production of ocean bugs, and maybe if the Bay of Fundy becomes productive again, the whales will go back. The whales do occasionally show up in the Bay of Fundy. I think they're like most animals. They go back sniffing in areas to see if there's food where there used to be food before moving on. So we know they are still there. Aerial surveys continue, and boat-based surveys still continue in the Bay of Fundy, so it isn't being forgotten. In fact, for a long time, the fishermen in the Bay of Fundy, and Brahmanan in particular, had surveys going on so that they would know where the whales were, and that was a part of their mitigation plan for managing the risks to whales as well. And I think that they're still very aware that the whales can come back, and every year there are some whales still in the Bay of Fundy for sure, so it's not being forgotten. As far as acoustic work, yes, there is some plans. The difficulty with acoustic work in the Bay of Fundy is we can't seem to use the gliders, like the OTN gliders that are used. The currents and the tides in the Bay of Fundy are too strong. These robots can't swim in the Bay of Fundy because it has the highest tides in the world, and therefore millions and millions of gallons of water sloshing around. And so those mobile acoustic robots aren't quite suitable. Stationary hydrophones can work. There is some work that's being done to put them in there and do some studies that are underway, but it's a very challenging area. It's not being forgotten for sure. Really good question, and all of the past work that's being done there has not been lost and is not going to stop anytime soon either. So, so rest assured that won't be forgotten.
That's excellent. So there's a question that's coming up that's probably the only one I could answer of all these questions, but I'm still going to leave it to you.
Okay.
Is there a way to predict whale movements with the glider data being collected by DAO?
Yeah, so again, the short answer is yes, there is. We need a lot of data. It is very useful to know where the whales are at different times of the year, and that's what this acoustic data is useful, both with the gliders and with different hydrophones that are out there. Unfortunately, it's not as simple as going out and listening for a single year or a week. It takes a lot more data to be able to predict where the whales are going to go and how they're going to use it. It's also a very big ocean, and there's only so many gliders and so many hydrophones, and so we need to put much more resources towards this. Yes, we can do that, and yes, it's underway.
Okay. So how has the pandemic impacted field work done on these species?
Yeah, it's impacted everything, I would say, except the whales, perhaps. Well, no, pardon me, I'll take that back. Perhaps the whales as well. First of all, for the whales, there is delays in fishing. There is slightly reduced fishing that's taking place. There is reduced shipping that's taking place. Cruise ships have canceled trips. Pleasure cruises have been canceled. So there is a lot less human activity on the ocean. So that's probably a good thing for the whales, I hope. It's impacted the research, us humans, because now it's not so easy for us to go out and do, for example, we have plans to do research on fishing gear. We have plans to do research with fishermen on new fishing techniques. There are scientists who are deploying gliders with Ocean Tracking Network and hydrophones. There are scientists who are doing aerial surveys in planes and on boats looking for whales, and much of all of that is in limbo right now because we're not sure if it's safe for humans to be in such close contact or not. So many of these research programs have been delayed because of the pandemic, which gives us some concern about keeping track of what's going on out there, which is very important, and for being able to continue collecting the data. So it has had impacts both on humans and whales, actually, and I think as soon as we get through this pandemic, we're going to go from 0 to 100 pretty quick and get back up to speed, though. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so 2 more questions. Is there a way to hold fishermen accountable for the gear that they take out in the water? So such as tracking system or a database of missing lines that could be accessed by lookout groups?
That is a tough question. It is difficult to make them accountable. I guess I'm not exactly clear what they mean by that. I will mention that fishing, when you go fishing and you put stuff in the ocean in general, sometimes it doesn't come, and that is no fault of anyone's because it is a very difficult place to work. Very expensive gliders have been lost in the ocean and lots of important equipment. And the same is certainly true with, for example, lobster traps or crab traps and buoy lines. These things get lost all the time. It is difficult to make someone accountable for these things because there's just all kinds of reasons that they can be lost. For the most part, I believe it is understood, and most people, fishermen in particular, who are putting gear in the water do not want to be leaving this stuff out there. And in fact, in some ways, it becomes hazards for themselves and for other fishermen as well. And I think that they want to avoid it. So this is something that's being discussed quite a bit, particularly as it relates to managing this lost gear and how we prevent it and how we keep track of where it is and maybe even how we remove it. But it is a complicated thing to do. The solution is definitely with working with the fishers because they're the ones who know how best to not lose their gear, possibly how best to get it back when they do. And they're the ones that are spending the most time out there. So difficult thing, but definitely being discussed right now.
So sorry, Sean, is that a program that CWF is taking on at all, working with the fishermen on that?
We have, many groups are. We are one of the groups that have worked on this, but there are other groups that have both from other NGOs and from fishing associations themselves. In fact, one of the larger ghost gear initiatives came from a group of fishermen in the Bay of Fundy who took it on themselves to find these areas where there were traps and gear that was lost on the bottom for all kinds of reasons, and they removed those as well. So we're doing some work in terms of trying to find ways to better mark and retrieve this stuff so that we don't lose gear. There are other groups that are studying the extent of lost gear and other groups that are actually taking it on themselves to get it out of there. So it is a full court press to try and figure out how to do this.
Yeah, thanks. I love stories like that when fishermen take up initiatives.
Yeah.
Okay, so very last question. I'm a teacher in St. John, New Brunswick. Myself and another teacher have been following your webinar. We and our high school students would like to support right whales. Some students have raised money to support the right whales. Is there a possibility of adopting a right whale? And also, are there any student-friendly online resources that we can share with our students?
Really cool question. I'm from St. John and went to high school in St. John, so I won't even ask which high school they went to because of course they're all valuable to me, not just my alma mater, but I'm a St. Johner for sure. There are resources, so let me see. Many organizations offer adopt wildlife programs. Canadian Wildlife Federation does, other NGOs do as well. The New England Aquarium out of Boston has a right whale adoption program as well, specifically. There they provide different pieces of information and benefits for people who adopt these animals. If you are trying to decide what you might want to do, or if there's an organization that you might be able to support, it might be easiest if you contact me directly at my email or something, and I'd be happy to talk about who you might be able to help support with the funding you're raising. It's very generous, by the way, and very helpful, because resources are pretty easy to burn up when we're doing this type of ocean work. There are all different sizes of organizations, and they can all benefit from this type of support. In terms of resources, our organizations have some resources. We've talked about in the webinar how we intend to be putting a bit of a package together and more information about the right whale problem and what people can do. If you, our intention as well is to continue this discussion and hold other webinars and talks, so please come back and it may be a source for you. One area of potential for you, if you're looking for educational materials, is the North Atlantic Right Whale Consortium. And this is at, the website is narwc.org, and they have a section of educational materials, and they have, when the pandemic started, they put quite a bit of effort into creating student-based activities that help educate about right whales and the conservation of right whales. And there's a number of really great activities in there, such as matching whales and so on. So I would encourage you to look to the Right Whale Consortium and to pay attention to our organizations as well, because we will also have resources that are available there too. So really exciting to hear that, and really glad to hear St. John is representing here in the right whale conservation world. So thanks for your question.
Well, thanks, Sean, and thank you, CWF. Thank you for taking the time to answer all of these questions post the webinar, and I hope it's satisfactory to the general.
Yeah, really appreciate everyone submitting these questions. I'm really glad we could take the time to answer them, and yeah, stay tuned. I hope we get a chance to talk to you again, and really appreciate you, Brendel. Thank you for stick handling all of these questions with me and getting them out the door. So thank you, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Bye now.